The 2018 election cycle heating up.
This is going to be a huge political race. You're going to see millions and millions of outside dollars being spent.
An open Senate seat creates a domino effect on other races.
You'll have so many of them vacating their seats potentially.
Plus, a state representative facing serious allegations. This is Arizona Week. Hello, and thank you for joining us. Arizona's open Senate seat generating excitement in political circles and opening conversations about the future of Arizona's political landscape. A comprehensive analysis now from political strategist in Phoenix. Drew Sexton served as a public affairs and communications specialist for Governor Jan Brewer. He now represents High Ground Public Affairs. And Jason Barraza, a former campaign coordinator for the Arizona Democratic Party. He's a senior associate with Veritas in Phoenix. Both strategists agree Arizona is in a unique spot come 2018. 12 men, the majority Republican, have represented Arizona in the U.S. Senate. Now Republican Kelly Ward and Democrat Kyrsten Sinema are running. And Republican Martha McSally told her colleagues she'll be in the race. We begin with Drew Sexton and his thoughts on the open Senate seat.
I think any candidate that wins the nomination for the Senate seat as a Republican, they're going to have a big advantage. But obviously, depending on how things are going on a national level, we've seen President Trump has already had an effect on turnout in places like Virginia and New Jersey. Things are up in the air. I think Republicans are going to need to make sure that they nominate a solid candidate who's not necessarily on the fringe of what we would say, the Republican Party is. They need to have a credible candidate that can build a winning general election coalition.
Jason, do Democrats see this as the perfect opportunity?
I think they do. I think you're dealing with a fractured Republican Party that starts all the way up at the top and is starting to trickle its way down. That's going to produce some very interesting results and could be that opportunity that Democrats need in this particular race.
Fracture. And Drew, that kind of sounds like a tough word to use, but it might be pretty accurate.
I think there has definitely been a shift ideologically in what the priorities are of Republican primary voters. I think we've gone from a party that's typically been associated with things like free trade to where we're more concerned about just a candidate that will fight for our beliefs, not necessarily be or have ideological purity. I think there is going to obviously be a tough Republican fight in the Senate, whether it's with former State Senator Kelly Ward and speculatively, Congresswoman Martha McSally, also Jay Heiler, who has the backing of Governor Brewer, is a candidate. It will be a tough, nasty primary, but I think we've seen traditionally over the past couple of cycles that Republicans have had tough primaries, but it's actually helped candidates in the long run. It's made them battle-tested, it's helped them fine-tune their messaging, and they've still had a lot of success in general elections.
Jason, on the Democratic side, we hear Congresswoman Kyrsten Sinema doing very well. How likely is she to just sort of lead this race from here to the end?
Well, I think her challenge is keeping her name out there and staying relevant. Without the primary, as Drew just said, that becomes a very difficult thing to do, which always tends to benefit those candidates that have that primary. They're the ones that are being covered in the media. They're having their talking points covered. In this race, though, I think it all comes down to Trump. It comes down to how much you're going to be associated or not associated with him coming out of that Republican primary. So for her, and in this race, I think it's all going to be all about trying to portray the eventual candidate that comes out of the Republican primary as a Trumpite, somebody that is on that fringe and that isn't the mainstream candidate.
Now, Arizona has long been a conservative state. Kelly Ward does have a connection to Donald Trump. Is Donald Trump Republican, Kelly Ward Republican, a Republican state, or is this some new breed of conservative?
Well, in our survey research at High Ground, we put out a poll in mid-August, and we found that 3 of 4 likely Republican primary voters still support President Trump. So he definitely does have importance. His endorsement will be a big deal within that Republican primary. Whether that impacts the general election in a positive light, I think that's still up for question. I think one of the interesting dynamics of a potential McSally Sinema or even a Ward Sinema race, traditionally we've seen Republicans that win the nomination, whether it's for governor or whether it's for Senate, typically they come from Maricopa County. And Pima County has long been a Democrat stronghold. That's where Democrats try to make up a lot of ground. In the instance of Congresswoman McSally, she represents a big part of Tucson. She has, ties to defending Davis-Monthan, so she's going to be able to hang tough in Pima. And I think that kind of makes for an interesting dynamic with Congresswoman Sinema. Her base is Tempe, it's East Phoenix, it's Chandler. So I think that will be an interesting thing to keep an eye on if Congresswoman Sinema will be able to take her message to rural counties like Mojave, like Yavapai, and like Yuma.
But then what happens? Who do we see jump in that race for CD2?
Well, I mean, we've already got a couple of candidates that are circling their names out there. I think, with Matt Hines, he's already running the race, so he's definitely got some name ID locally. But you have Ann Kirkpatrick, which has moved into the district. It could be a very potent adversary for any Republican that decides to step forward in that race.
CD2 has always been watched from a national perspective. What is it about Congressional District 2 that is just so fascinating? Jason, we'll start with you.
I think when you just go to the very basics of it, right, and we're looking at registration, it's one of those districts that is pretty close in registration for either side to be able to make a play for it, just based on solid registration numbers. But then you bring in some outside factors where you have a military base, which tends to play towards more Republican candidates, but you have a very strong environmental presence down in southern Arizona, which tends to go towards more Democratic candidates. So I think you're dealing with a district that has issues that are important or present there for its constituents that can play to either side of the aisle, and a very close registration base. So it makes it appealing to either side.
I think CD2 is kind of a fascinating district. It was one of only 23 districts in the country that voted for Secretary Clinton, but also a Republican congressional candidate, in this instance, Congresswoman McSally. So I think the dynamic of having a large, a chunk of that urban Tucson community, but also that stretches all the way to the border. You have Cochise County, you're going down to Sierra Vista. It is a very unique dynamic in terms of that mix of urban and rural. So any candidate that runs in CD2 is going to have to find that right mix between representing those that are in urban communities and those that are in rural. Because as we see, electoral results, that's becoming the biggest divide and indicator of partisan voting, whether you live in an urban community or whether you live in a rural community. That's kind of the divide, and I think that's what makes CD2 unique. It's one of the few districts that really brings both of those factors together.
Are these Democrats that have sort of connected themselves to the Hillary Clinton camp that we saw more than a year ago? Are these different? I mean, are Democrats likely to see some fracture in what their party once was? And what
well, I was just going to say, I mean, we just talked about fracturing in the Republican Party. I don't think Democrats have quite come across who they are and have defined themselves either. And I think that that's something that we need to see in the next year or so develop out of Democrats, defining who they are, coming forward with their messaging. Because if they don't do that, they won't be able to take a benefit off of the opportunities that are being presented.
Drew, two parties who are sort of identifying themselves in a state that has long been a conservative place. Does that mean we are this purple that Jason wants us to think we might be?
Well, I think both parties really are kind of looking in the mirror and saying, who are we? What do we want to be? What values do we represent? Are we committed to ideological pursuits? Are we committed to getting things done? Or are we mostly just committed to angering the other side? And I think we've seen a lot of that on the Republican Party. It's not necessarily getting things done, it's mostly being against things. And I think any candidate that manages to get to a general election, they have an advantage, but I think they need to be able to paint a picture of getting things done, of being able to stand up and fight for Arizona, not necessarily one party or the other, but being able to, push for policies like defending Davis-Monthan, like defending Luke Air Force Base, making sure that we're staying safe, finding a solution to immigration. This is something that we've been talking about as a state since 2006, and there still has not been a solution to immigration reform here. So that's really, I think, ultimately what Republicans, if they want to be successful in this cycle and moving forward for the next decade, they need to be able to show some results.
Jason, what ought the Democrats be doing as they move into this cycle?
A lot of the same things. I've often said that stop attacking your opponents, because nobody wants a negative message. The candidates that seem to be successful, and we've seen this time and time again, are those that can portray a positive vision for what the future holds. People want to be able to follow somebody forward. If you don't do that, you're not going to be able to gain the support that you need, and people will often follow the status quo. They'll go back to what they know, and in many times, especially here in Arizona, that means that the Republican candidate's going to be successful.
Okay. Joe, as we look into this next election cycle, where does Arizona fit on the national map when it comes to politics?
Well, specifically on the Senate side, you have right now Republicans hold only a 2-seat advantage, and the map as a whole nationally, mostly Democrats are going to be defending. There are about 23 Democrats that are up for re-election, so there's only 8 Republicans that are looking for to be re-elected. But we've already seen, like Senator Flake has stepped away, so this is an open seat. So as Democrats are trying to, close that margin in the Senate, this is going to be a huge political race. You're going to see millions and millions of outside dollars being spent by dark money groups, by candidate PACs. There's going to be a lot of money and a lot of attention focused on this race. So I think the question is for candidates, do they want to make this a divisive, nasty race where traditionally we see that kind of devolve when you get outside money in and you get kind of a race to the bottom? Or do they want to present a vision for not only their party, but the state, where they can lead and say, hey, look, I'm going to go to the Senate and I'm going to represent Arizona. I'm going to fight for us on immigration reform. I'm going to fight for us on defending our military bases. I'm going to fight to make sure that middle-class Americans get tax reform done and they pay less in taxes. So I think really that's going to be the key for Republicans.
Jason?
I think it's going to be a high dollar spending. We're going to see more commercials, more ads, more mailers than we've probably seen in any time in recent history. And I personally think it's going to get negative pretty quickly. I think that without candidates being able to necessarily control what message is being put out there from those outside groups, they're going to come in hot and heavy, and they're going to be slinging as much mud as they can. So we'll see how the electorate deals with that and how they react.
We have had, 11 or 12 men take Senate seats in Arizona in our state's history. But we've also been one of the few states that's had 4 women as governors.
Absolutely. I think, Arizonans specifically have always, taken great pride in their independent spirit. I mean, that dates back to Barry Goldwater, to John McCain, to even recently Jan Brewer, somebody that will stick up and fight for those who feel like they're not been fighting for, or they haven't been fought for, and especially those who are willing to buck the establishment, buck traditional, party beliefs. I think that Arizona again has an opportunity to be in the center of the national spotlight, and right now it's likely that in the general election we're going to have 2 female candidates, and I think there's going to be a lot of that will be a huge impact for letting future Arizonans know that hey, anything is possible here in this state.
I think Arizona has always been ahead of its times. When you look back to our starting with the initiative and referendum process that we adopted, and we've always been looking for new ways or new things to be able to conduct government here in Arizona. And we've been open to different ideals. Having a time where you've had 4 executives be women, recently, and there has been in recent history, 5 of the top statewide offices have been held by women at the same time. That's a rarity and something that people don't necessarily connect with Arizona, but Arizona is unique. We are special, and I think I agree that I think we're going to be looking at 2 female candidates running for Senate here, and it'll be a historical election for just that fact.
That progressiveness is what Democrats say will shine once again in 2018. Hershel Fink, the executive director of the Arizona Democratic Party, predicts Arizona's political landscape is about to change.
It's definitely an exciting time to be a Democrat in Arizona. We have had, since the election, our participation has been through the roof. I mean, we have at our LD meetings, at our county meetings, it's standing room only. There are LD meetings where we used to have 10 or 15 people, now have 40. The meetings that used to have 40 or 50 now have 300. So, I mean, it has really been impressive and exciting to see the participation on our side, the people that want to be engaged, the people that have been engaged, but then also the people that were not necessarily engaged previously, who realized that they have to be, that there's no longer an option for them to sit on the sidelines and hope things work out like they expected them to. I think having Donald Trump elected as our president really shook people to the core.
Historically, Arizona has been a Republican stronghold. Is that a true statement to you representing the Democratic Party?
Yes, in a lot of ways. I mean, we obviously have won here. Governor Napolitano is a perfect example. We can win here. It's been Republicans are in control currently. They have been recently. And I think in a lot of ways they've done a really bad job, especially when it comes to things like education here in Arizona. I mean, we're at the bottom of the country in education funding. We're in the bottom of the country in quality of life. And these are things that the Republican administration, with whether it's just focusing on tax cuts or whatever it is, it's become a culture of corruption in this Ducey administration and the rest of the Republicans in office here, and we need to make some changes. Democrats can do better. We know it. We just need to prove it to the voters. We can do better once we get elected, and we just have to get elected to show that.
Let's move to the Senate. An open seat coming up. We already know of one very well-known congresswoman who will throw her name in the hat. Arizona, though, has always had Republican men lead Arizona's Senate. What's likely to happen this time around?
I think we're going to win a Senate seat. I mean, because of this healthcare vote and what's going on in Washington, Republicans are just focused on the wrong things, the things that are not important to people in Arizona. They want to take away healthcare from 400,000 people. They want to pass a tax cut probably this week, or tax reform this week, that's going to harm middle-class families. And that's not why people send representatives to Washington. There is a Republican civil war going on at the national level, and it's happening here. The Steve Bannon versus Mitch McConnell wings of the Republican Party. That's the reason Jeff Flake had to get out of the race. He just saw that there was not a path for him to be victorious in this Republican culture.
It's been a few years since a Democrat had 2nd congressional district. Do you likely see it perhaps returning to a Democrat?
Absolutely. I mean, we have really strong candidates. We have a very vibrant primary. That's a good thing. We're going to have a lot of people paying attention to what's going on there. And whoever replaces Martha McSally on the Republican side, assuming she is going to do what she told her friends in Washington that she's going to run for the Senate, it's a clown car of candidates there. I mean, there's nobody there that is really going to speak for the voters of Southern Arizona.
Democrats lost the White House. Does that mean the party is also looking to re-identify itself or come together?
I think in a lot of ways, yes. I mean, we, on the national level for sure, what we in Arizona were able to do, we did not win, obviously, but we got within 3 points of winning Arizona for Hillary Clinton over Donald Trump. We worked pretty well with our different wings of the Democratic Party. I know that's been a story nationally as some of those fights. Democrats from the DNC on down are working to come together because there's so much at risk here that we can't have inter-party squabbles.
Tell me about the values that the Democrats hold so dearly. I mean, how do you describe a Democrat in Arizona today?
Basically, we care about people. We want to help people. We want to have a government that will take care of our most vulnerable. Obviously, we care about our national security and things that everybody cares about, but we really feel like it's the government's job to make sure that our most vulnerable in the society are not left behind.
On the other side of the aisle, Republicans say Arizona is a conservative stronghold and it'll stay that way come next November. Here's Torunn Sinclair, Communications Director of the Arizona Republican Party. Tell me where the party is when we're looking to the next election cycle.
You know, I think the party's in a great place right now. You look at our voter registration numbers, they're increasing. Right now we're beating the Democrats 55-1 on a 55-1 margin in voter registration. Since January, you've seen us register a little over, almost 9,000 voters. So we've registered, I think, 8,792 voters compared to the Democrats' 161. They've netted 161 new voter registrations since January.
What do you attribute that to? Is it President Trump?
Yeah, I think it's just the momentum. You know, you see a lot of momentum from the Republican Party. You know, Donald Trump is very well liked in Arizona. And you just see people wanting a change. And I think they see the Republican Party as kind of being the catalyst for that change.
Jeff Flake has announced that he's finished with the Senate. Now we hear that Congresswoman Martha McSally may be interested in that spot. I think this sort of creates a domino situation. So what's in line for Republicans here in Arizona?
So, I mean, Representative McSally hasn't announced yet, so we're not really going to speculate on that. But you look at CD2 and you look at Martha McSally and CD2, you look at the last election in 2016, and she won that election by 14 points. You also saw that John McCain beat Ann Kirkpatrick in CD2 as well, when you look at those numbers. And Ann Kirkpatrick is currently running for Congress in that district. I think no matter what Republican runs in a CD2 race, you're going to see that person win.
We've always had Republican men serve in the Senate here to represent Arizona. Is that likely to continue?
You know, I think right now there's a lot of females in the race, and I think no matter, you know, it doesn't matter if you're a Republican or a Democrat, that's really exciting. So I would bet you see a female in the Senate in 2018.
You said the Republicans have momentum. What does the party need to do to keep that momentum? This starts the election cycle pretty early.
Yeah, we're doing what we always do. We're going to register voters. We're going to turn people out. We're going to keep talking to new Republicans. That's what you see us do, and that's what you see us do until there is a GOP nominee in 2018. So you'll see us really start to engage with those candidates in August of 2018.
We've heard a lot of political pundits say there's fracturing in the Republican Party. Do you see that here in Arizona?
Well, I think you look at our statewide elections, and you go back to at least 2010. Democrats in Arizona haven't held a statewide office, since 2010. And you look at that, and you look at the really tough GOP primaries that we have, and I think you can attribute our tough GOP primaries to us winning in those generals. So you look at 2010 and you look at Jan Brewer, and Jan Brewer was an incumbent governor, and she had a primary challenge. You look at 2012 and that open Senate seat, and Jeff Flake won in a general. You look at 2014, and 2014 had a pretty tough governor's race. You saw an incumbent governor, you saw Jan Brewer endorse in our primary, and you did not see a tough Democrat primary on that side, and we won in a general. And you look at that for Secretary of State, you look at that for Attorney General, you look at that for the treasurer's race and the superintendent's race as well. And we always win, and you see that in 2016 as well. So I think that we're going to turn out, and we're going to turn out our people, and we're going to turn out Republicans, and it doesn't matter if it's a tough primary race in 2018, you're going to see us win.
Tell me about the Republican Party, because Senator Flake himself said that I can't continue this way with this president. So what do Republicans stand for?
Do you know, I can't really speak to Senator Flake and the way he views his campaign moving forward. But I think of course there's room for every single person that considers themselves a Republican in the Republican Party. We are a very big tent. Oftentimes you see Republicans that don't agree with each other. But, at least in Arizona, we win.
Other news now, a national story hitting close to home. An Arizona lawmaker suspended from his leadership position after multiple allegations of sexual harassment. Representative Don Shooter, a Republican who served in the Arizona Senate before the House, is temporarily suspended from his position as chairman of the House Appropriations Committee. That's the committee that drafts the budget. Luige del Puerto, editor and publisher of the Arizona Capital Times now, with more on the possible political fallout.
That means that the House leadership recognized the gravity of the allegations against him, acknowledged that with those kinds of allegations it would be hard for this very important committee to do its work, and that it is better if Don Shooter is somewhat, I wouldn't say severed, but there's some distance between him and this particular committee.
Here we are in November. Where does this take the conversation come January when the session is here and ready to work?
I think you're going to continue to have this conversation moving forward. There is the possibility that you'll have more women come out and say, this happened to me too, at the state capitol. Already we have the House representatives coming out with its policy on how to deal with sexual harassment. And in the Senate, they've had to dig up a policy that they had come up with many, many years ago. And now their attorneys over there in the state Senate are looking at this document and asking, does it need to be updated?
Will this distract from what needs to take place come the first part of the year?
I wouldn't call it a distraction. I think it's a very important discussion to have. And now is a better time to have this discussion. But it will be something they will have to deal with. And they will have to find a way to deal with this and address this, and at the same time do their regular responsibilities. They really only have one big assignment, and that is to produce a budget for next year. And as long as they're able to do that, and I have no reason to believe they're not going to be able to do that.
Representative Shooter, long-standing, long-running in the Arizona House. Does this run the risk of damaging his credibility, his party's credibility, even damaging the reputation of the House?
It damages his credibility, there's no doubt. And now he is not able to do his job, as a chairman of the House Appropriations Committee. But I want to shift it rather than focus on how much damage it has to him or his credibility or his political career, really the conversation, I think, in my mind, is that we have a culture in the state legislature that you want to call it a good old boys club culture, and now we're having to not necessarily reconsider that, but to take seriously at how, where that has brought us and what kind of culture or climate that has created for women who are working in the state capitol, whether you're a lobbyist or an intern or just somebody who's advocating for your interests.
Moving beyond that discussion, Arizona has really become in the national political spotlight with news of a senator vacating his seat, quite possibly a congressional district. What does that say as we move into the next election cycle?
Candidly, we could have 2 U.S. Senate seats open up for vacancies next year. And if that happens, and there are some who believe that that might happen, if that happens, we already have 1 seat that's going to be vacant, Senator Jeff Flake's. But we also know Senator McCain is battling cancer. If he does, for example, step down, many are saying that you could have a structural change in the political scene in Arizona. You could have a whole bunch of congressional incumbents look at either one of those Senate seats, and if they vacate their seats to run for the U.S. Senate, then you'll have lawmakers and mayors, councilors, county supervisors looking at congressional races. And if they vacated their seats, then somebody would have to fill those positions. So you could be looking at school boards, maybe even the irrigation districts, a whole lot of people coming in. And so should that happen, a lot of people are seeing, as I mentioned, sort of this structural change in the people that are coming in. You'll have so many of them vacating their seats potentially that you'll have a completely different structure. I mean, you're seeing that in the city of Phoenix, for example. With Kyrsten Sinema vacating her congressional seat, you have Greg Stanton, and now there are I think there are 3 council members that are looking at running for his seat. Those seats have to be filled. Those people have to come from somewhere. So you could have vacancies in the state legislators or open seats in the state legislature. And so as one lobbyist and consultant put it to me the other day, you're not looking at one tsunami, you're looking at 5 of them.
And that's our show this week. But before we go, a quick announcement. I will be leaving the host seat for the next few weeks as we retool for a new public affairs show that will launch in January. In the meantime, stay tuned for more episodes of Arizona Week in December. Thank you for watching.